Okay, Ted Pattison here from the Power BI CAT team. We're now on to part 4 of the App Owns Data Starter Kit video series. And in this video, we're going to test the App Owns Data application. So in our previous video, in part 3, we opened the App Owns Data Starter Kit in Visual Studio, and we configured the AppOwnsDataAdmin application, and we created the database, the AppOwnsDataDB database. So now we're ready to move ahead and test the application. So when we start up the application, we're going to log in, and our first step is to create a new customer tenant. So there's going to be an onboard new tenant page that we can get to. We'll fill in the details, and just clicking the button should run the code that is going to provision the new customer tenant. So let's give this AppOwnsDataAdmin application a shot. So what you did in the previous video with the startup instructions is you opened up appsettings.json, and we made sure that we basically were able to configure it with the appropriate Azure AD application configuration data so we can authenticate a service principal. Also, we made sure that the DB connection string is something that enabled us to create the database. So you should have been able to verify the database has been created with the tenants table, the users table, the activity log table, and also whatever account that you're using, you're going to put that account here. And the reason we like this setting is because when the service principal creates a workspace in Power BI, it will add this account, as an administrator as well. Okay, so now the moment of truth. Let's go back here, and I'm going to press IS Express, or you could hit the F5 key, and now the application is going to start up. Now, when the application starts up, the user has to authenticate, using an account, inside there. So, we'll go ahead and authenticate. And, after we authenticate as this user, there's one time where Azure AD will present to that user that this app is asking for permissions, and they're not anything specific, other than the user can log in. And remember that this user, we'll never get an access token for this user. We just want to make sure that this user, is from this organization. And as now we get in here and we start creating tenants, it's not going to use that user's permission. It's going to use the service principal. So let's go ahead and click on tenants. And so as we click on tenants, let's click on onboard new tenant. Now, the way things work out here is that there's a database list, and there are 4 sample databases I have. I'm paying $5 a month for each one in Azure, but they all have the same schema. They all have a fairly small set of data. So let's say the first one we'll name Acme Corp. And the way that things work, you name the tenant. That's going to be the tenant name, but it's also going to be the name they use when they create the Power BI workspace. So right now there is code, that's running behind the scenes, that should be, creating a new workspace in Power BI. Now that it's done, we see we've created Acme Corp. Okay, let's create a couple. So in addition to Acme Corp, let's go ahead and create one for Contoso. And, as I create the tenant for Contoso, we'll wait a second. Right now, it's just running the code, that is creating the workspace, uploading the PBIX file. Let's go ahead and create one more. And so in this case right here, this will be for Wingtip. And, as we have Wingtip inside here, we'll go ahead and choose OK. And so one thing that this admin application allows you to do, so remember, you're the administrator, and these are your different customers, and there's a tenant for each one. And each one should have a report that points to a different database. So we've provided the embed. So from the administrative application, you can see the sales report for the first tenant, first customer, Acme Corp. And then, we want to see the one for Contoso. So what you can see is that they all have the same database schema, but all of them have different database records. Okay, so it looks like the onboarding process is going just fine right here. Also note that if I click on view, it will show a page And so here's the data that we're keeping in the database in the top screen. One more thing is, if I go back over here, and now we want to look at the SQL Object Explorer, and I go look at the tenants table, and now let's go ahead and view the data inside. You're going to see that each time I've created something in Power BI, it's basically recorded, what the workspace grids are, what the workspace URLs are inside here. So once again, here's things from the database, but yet the code is also using the Power BI Service API, at runtime to query who are the members of this workspace. Well, it's the service principal for AppOwnsData Service App, and it's me because I added myself as that demo user. And currently, there is one data set and one report inside there. Okay, just to return to the slide and recap what happened is once we started up the AppOwnsDataAdmin application, we were able to go to the onboard new tenant page, fill in information, click a button, and it ran code that actually created something in Power BI, a workspace, and added content. And inside of the admin application, we could see actual records. And then we also kind of saw that those records are being tracked in the underlying AppOwnsDataDB database. Now, we also saw that I showed an example of the tenant details page. So in the AppOwnsDataAdmin application, someone can go to the tenant details page and see all the data that you've trapped in the database. But yet we can also make it a runtime query, into Power BI if we want to look at something like who are the members of this workspace? What are the data sets? What are the reports? You could take this further and look at the data sets and look at refresh history, things like that. Okay, now another thing that you saw is into the admin application, we wanted to kind of put a quick, convenient way for the administrators to quickly look at the reports across all the different tenants. So there's a quick way to just click on the embed button for a specific tenant, and it just brings you to a page where it embeds the standard sales report. Okay, now one more thing we want to take a look at is, what's been created in Power BI. So let's go ahead and take a quick look behind the scenes just to see, what the code, has actually done. Okay, let's go back to the AppOwnsDataAdmin application, and let's look at one of the tenants. And note that we have one button that lets me navigate, right to the actual workspace inside the Power BI portal. So let's go ahead, click on that. We should be able to navigate, over to that workspace. And, what you can see is that since, your account has been added in, you should be able to see all the different workspaces. Going a little bit further, if we look at one of these data sets, let's go down here and let's go to settings. And first of all, every data set has a configured by property that basically tells you who the current owner is. And so it's not a user, but we can see, it's the AppOwnsData Service App, so you can basically see, it is owned, by the service principal. Also note that the service principal set up the data set credential patching, and then it also ran a refresh operation, so we should be able to see that, just a couple of minutes ago when I ran this code is when we completed our first refresh operation. Okay, now let's go a little bit further here. Let's go back here. Let's create, one more of these particular workspaces, this one for Megacorp right here. And this time when I click OK, one of the things that I want to do is let's bring in this tool, which is Fiddler. So Fiddler, is a tool that allows you to see requests that are going on behind the scenes. So we want to record things from Visual Studio. Also I can add filters. I don't want it to be too noisy as I look at the requests. So I'm going to filter out and only see things that come, to the URL api.powerbi.com. Okay, and now let's go ahead and move back to inspectors. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create this new group in here, and you can actually see, all the code, that is being run, as it does this, onboarding process. So let's go back here. And, the first one that we're going to do is we're going to do a post to create a new group. And what you can see is that if you just post to my org groups and you have the name of the workspace, it creates the workspace. What comes back from the code inside here. Okay, now the next thing, after creating the workspace that we have to do is we have to basically add a user. So here's the code that's adding me as a user. So together with the service principal, the two of us are admins of that workspace. And then we have an import operation. Now, what's kind of interesting about the import operation is that when you do an import, it's asynchronous. And the idea is, let's kind of go back here, to this code. And if I now draw into AppOwnsDataAdmin services, and we kind of look at the Power BI Service API, and what I want to do is I want to go down here and I want to find a particular method right here. And in particular, let's collapse. And now I'm going to go down here and find publish to PBIX. And what you can see here is that, when you first, do this post import with file group, that's asynchronous. That's going to return, before the import job is done. So then what we do is we continually, call get import and group until we see, it's no longer publishing. Right here, you can kind of see that, each time we choose it, it still says publishing. And, eventually down here, here's the last one where it's not ready. And then I pull again. And now we can see that, the import state has succeeded. And there are the reports inside. And now there's some extra code down here, that's going to go through the process of, setting the data source credentials. We're also taking the PBIX file import creates a data set that has parameters. So here's, where we actually change that. Okay, now let's do one more thing here. This should be, so if we come back down here, and now what I'm going to do is let's stop for a second. Let's go back, into our controller, and inside of our controller, let's go to, where we create a new tenant. So there is the onboard new tenant, and we'll go ahead and we will set a breakpoint right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this right here. And so, as we run this, let's go ahead and sign in. And this time we'll create a new tenant. We'll just name this one tenant one, that's fine. So let's go ahead and choose OK. Okay, and now, let's come back here. And if I, now put this into full screen mode. Okay, and now let's start, going through here. And the first thing we want to do, is call into the Power BI Service API, to basically create this new tenant. Okay, so we get our app only access token. Now here's using the Power BI .NET SDK. So what's kind of nice about this is that, let's go back here and let me go ahead and remove. And now, as we execute this piece of code right here, what we should see is that, that has created the workspace. You can also see it if you're not using the .NET SDK. You have to parse together these URLs. You have to put together the JSON body going in, and then coming back, after you create the workspace, you can see that the response, is going to give you the ID inside there. Okay. And so as we go through here, let's continue to, now it's going to take that admin, user, which is going to be, in this case, me. And now we're going to call add groups in user. And once again, you can kind of see that now we've added the user, so now two of us are administrators of that workspace. As we go down here, now we're going to go through this process of importing the PBIX file. So we have this template. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to, first of all, call that publish PBIX file function that we just looked at. And that's not just going to publish it, but it's also going to loop and wait till that job has succeeded before it returns back. Okay, and any second now, here it is back. And so now I have a data set. But the problem is that my data set is still from the template. It doesn't point to the user's database. So what we're going to do is we're going to fish into the database and figure out that this particular tenant, has this database server, and this database name. Okay, so as we keep coming through here and I update the data set parameters, what we should see, back here, is the, actual request where now I've kind of redirected the data set to point to a different database. Now, once you do that, you can't do a refresh operation until you set the credentials. So now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of move through this process of patch SQL credentials. And, as I step inside here, it looks like I wasn't able to step in that code, but what we should be able to do now, is to get those credentials. Actually, we are in the method right here. So one of the things that you could see is that once you've added the data set, you then query the data set to see the data sources inside of it. So that's data set, get data sources in group. There is the workspace ID. There's the data set ID. And what we're able to kind of get back here, is the fact that there is one data source. And the idea is we're able to kind of discover the data source. And once we discover it, to ensure it's the right type, so this one is going to be of type SQL. And so now, depending on the type of data source, this is a SQL data source. I'm going to set basic credentials here, but the idea is that now we should be able to, run that piece of code right there. And, now we should fall out of this method. And, what we see here is that, now we've set the data source credentials. If we look, back over here, we definitely want to see, 200 OK coming back. Okay. And now we're kind of in the home stretch. Now all we have to do, is call a refresh operation. This starts the refresh operation, on the data set. And now we've got the data set, back to, exactly where those other ones were, and I should be able to kind of instantly, start working with the data set inside here. Okay. So once again, I wanted to kind of show what the requests look like and also point out that, if you're able to use .NET, you're going to be able to use the Power BI .NET SDK, which just makes things a lot easier. Unfortunately, if you're not using .NET, if you're writing your server-side code on Node.js or Java, or you're using Apex and Salesforce, then, you basically have to figure out, how to put together these URLs. And one thing that I've done a lot is I get the demo working with the Power BI .NET SDK code. And once it works, I just kind of reverse engineer things, by looking at this request. And now I can come through here and, save this off as a, a fiddler file, that would just kind of list each request, what was the URL and what was the JSON passed in the request and what was the JSON passed back in the payload. But once again, if you are not using .NET and you can't use the Power BI .NET SDK, your first stop should be go to the Power BI REST API documentation. Just Google or Bing Power BI REST API. And as you do that, this is going to give you, the straight ahead documentation. For instance, I go to groups. How do I create a new group? And once again, there's the URLs and there are the parameters you have to put back and forth. So everything that I've done in the demo, is fully documented, as far as how to call those REST APIs. Okay, we're going to wrap up the part 4 video with a quick look at the PBX template file named salesreporttemplate.pbix. So the AppOwnsDataAdmin application uses this physical file, the PBIX file, which is the template, to basically perform the import operation. Now, when you import a PBIX file, it can create sometimes a data set, sometimes a report, most often both. And so you get to name the import. And so we're going to name it sales. And so therefore, importing this file will create a new sales data set and the new sales report. Now, the sales data set is parameterized with the database server and the database name. And that's the trick that, it basically gives us the ability to redirect the data set to any SQL database that we want to, as we're, executing the code that's part of the onboarding process. Now, what you're going to see is that this file, this p-by-x file, has dataset parameters. And then not only does it declare dataset parameters, but it uses them in all the underlying queries. Now, the dataset in sales report template, is fairly simple. It queries from a customers table and a sales table. It uses DAX to create a calculated table. So we have a calendar table, and then it has both a, regular master view, and it has a design view. So let's take a quick look at that. Okay, here we are back in the AppOwnsDataAdmin application. And so at the root of this project is a folder www root. And down there's files that are kind of pushed out with the application. So we have a p-by-x folder that has the sales report.template.pbyx. Now, if I double click on this file, I can basically open this in Power BI desktop. Now, let's start by, if I click the transform button, that will take me to the Power Query editor window. And from there, I can see the manage parameters button. Now, let's go ahead and click on this. And so, what you can see here is that we have two parameters, one name database server, other name database name. Please note that the default type is any, and you don't want to leave it as that because it has to be strongly typed for you to be able to change it programmatically. In our case right here, this template is from a machine that, doesn't have that inside here. So this is, currently not working. Note that if I take one of these tables and I now, open up the advanced editor, the secret to making this work is, first of all, you define parameters. Then in your queries, you use the parameters instead of hard-coded strings. But what's kind of nice about this, let's go ahead and do a close and apply, and it can't run the query, because it doesn't have the right information. But now if I come down here and I say edit parameters, wingtip sales is fine, but now let's do a dev camp database windows.net, if I can spell this correctly. And so, now that I've kind of changed it to a actual database, there's something that says you can't really refresh it until you patch the credentials. So let's go ahead and apply changes. And on my machine, I've never set these credentials. So I'm going to go ahead and pick database and CPT, student. And if I remember the password correctly, I should be able to click OK, and have that connection made. So I'm doing, the setting of, the database location and patching credentials manually through Power BI desktop, but we're going to accomplish the exact same thing programmatically, at runtime, to be able to kind of swap this database out. Okay, any second now, we should see that this has gotten all the data it wants. Okay, and so now it updates, with the data, from this new database right here, and going back here, what you can see is that we do the import, we give the sales data set the name of sales, and then we go back and we get the ID. One of the things that we need is the data set ID. So after doing the import, being able to figure out what the data set ID. So now you can call update parameters in group. And, here are, the two update mashup parameter details objects, that allow us to actually, redirect the database. And once again, setting credentials and running the refresh operation, typically what you do, after redirecting the data set to look at a different SQL database instance. Okay, and just one more thing I want to call out about the report. Here I'm in Power BI desktop. So if we go to the View tab in the ribbon, there is a mobile layout. So what we're working on here is the standard view, what's called the master view. Let's go ahead and click on mobile layout. And what you can see is we have a design for building the mobile layout. And if you don't build a mobile layout, it will just use your master layout. But our client application that we're going to look at in the next section, is going to show that we can transition back and forth between the master view and the mobile view, but you can't do it, unless you've designed, your report with this type of mobile view. Okay, and hopefully that walkthrough of how we use the PBX template file, demonstrates to you how we've used it in this sample application and how you might be creative and use it in similar or extended ways, in your own solutions. Okay, so that brings us to the end of video 4, and we've tested out the AppOwnsDataAdmin application. We've gotten our multi-tenant environment up and going with a couple different tenants. Well, now let's get the AppOwnsData client application working. That's what we're going to do in the next video. And that's going to also involve having to configure the AppOwnsData web API so that the AppOwnsData client can use it. Okay, lots to look forward to.